We are symbiotic with bacteria in our guts.
What agent is that? Where is the agency?
What is an individual? And I think that's one question. But we when we consider that 8% of our DNA came from viruses, which is actually more than the Neanderthal DNA that we contain, you realise that we have evolved together with lots of other organisms. We couldn't be here if we didn't have mitochondria, for example.
Consider for a moment the life cycle of Dictyostelium. Sorry about the Latin names, you can blame Linnaeus for that, but this creature has an extraordinary life cycle. It starts with a little spore, a little bit like a seed, which has been blown through the air. It lands somewhere and happens to be water. It becomes an amoeba-like single cell that wanders around. It encounters a period of starvation, and it starts to link up with its colleagues, other Dictyostelium amoebae, that then come together to form a slug so they can go in search of food together. And what the slug does, if it finds that it's getting a bit dry and there isn't much around to eat, it starts to grow a plant. It becomes a stalk, and at the top of the stalk there's a great big head, a global thing that contains the final spores that then get released into the atmosphere and go shooting off in the wind to start the whole process again. What agent is that? Where is the agency?
I don't know what else to say. I guess the problem we have, is that do we have any disagreement here? And where is the tension? The tension, I think, comes from what is often called the neo-Darwinist view of evolution. And that is that the unit of evolution is the individual. And this was really brought to the fore in the 1970s and 80s, particularly with Richard Dawkins' wonderful book, The Selfish Gene. But it really powerhoused this idea that the individual is everything in explaining evolution. Contrary to that opinion was the group selectionist approach. The neo-Darwinian approach is you can only understand evolution if you understand animals and plants and microbes as competing individuals. They don't care about each other, they just want to promote their own replication. Now, opposed to that, an older idea is a group selection idea, that groups would evolve. So humanity, for example, would evolve as a whole, and it wouldn't be individuals. It would be because we can club together and do things like hunt and stuff like that. And it's the group that would evolve rather than individuals. And this was famously argued out in the social insects, where social insects like ants, some of them, the worker ants, sacrifice their reproductive capacity for the queen. They just look after the queen. And Richard Dawkins and other evolutionary biologists at the time pointed out, actually they're doing something that is ultimately selfish, as in the selfish gene, because the genes in their body are also in the queen. And actually it makes more genetic sense for them to promote their queen's survival rather than their own. So this created a big conflict in biology between the individual-centric biologists, who certainly came to the fore in the later part of the 20th century, and the group selectionists who thought of communities.
If you think about the evolution of flowers, it's critically dependent upon their pollinators. A flower is nothing more than a means to attract a pollinating insect. So there you can say that they are completely different species which have co-evolved.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing which is really interesting is, actually, I was thinking of this in a different way, to say it in a different way, which is, why do we have male and female individuals? But it comes down to the same thing, because, at first glance, it seems really crazy to have both male and females, because if we reproduced asexually, everybody would have several offspring. You wouldn't have to have two people to do it. So you'd have many more offspring. But of course, sex, as we know, creates genetic diversity as the parental genes recombine in new ways. So sex enables more rapid shuffling of genes, and importantly, the really critical thing, rapid resistance against parasites. So parasites have also helped the way that we evolve in a way, I think. So, the thing is that the really bad thing, of course, is that we develop resistance to a parasite, but the parasite then attacks back in a kind of evolutionary arms race, and then we have to develop a different type of resistance.
But in terms of our understanding of biology, which vocabulary are we using? Like, which one is dominating?
Do you know, I wonder whether that sort of thing about vocabulary is actually useful. I think the most interesting thing is to try to understand how systems work and how organisms work and how cells interact with one another.
And is that approach being taken?
Oh, all the time.
There was a book written by a famous Scottish natural historian, Wyn Edwards, working up in St Andrews, published a book called Animal Dispersion, in which, from his field studies, he had noticed that groups of animals, he was a group selectionist therefore, to come now to the point that we've just been discussing, that groups of animals can communicate when resources are getting short. They do not compete to the point at which they are starving. They do not compete to the point at which lemmings run over a cliff. They communicate to each other and they adjust their population. This was Wyn Edwards' 1950s. What happened? By 1958, we had the central dogma of molecular biology. By 1976, we had the selfish gene. Wyn Edwards' book was destroyed. It should never have been.
I guess the question may be which level again. If we talk about individuals, are you autonomous? Of course you're not. You need lots of people around you. But I guess also whether species are autonomous, and this is the one that kind of goes into symbiosis but beyond it. Obviously, we are symbiotic with bacteria in our guts that we require for digestion and to make some of our vitamins. Corals, famously, they have a symbiotic algae living within them. And do they evolve as individuals, or is the coral and the algae a unit that evolves together? And corals have been around for millions and millions of years, so we would guess that this collaboration between algae and a simple animal has been evolving as a unit. And then you kind of ask, well, because yes, it's easy to, the initial conflict was whether individuals of a single species are the unit of evolution. And the argument was it's lots of individuals of that species are the units of evolution. But now we're saying that actually several species together may evolve together, as we think the coral and Zoolanthia, the algae that live with them, evolve together. And then that's very important because you've then got to keep conditions for two organisms correct. And as we know, when our seas become more acidic or warmer, the Zoolanthia clear off and leave the corals to die, because that's when we get bleaching of corals. So essentially, if we want to do anything about our planet, we can't have that idea that species are independent. We've got to realize all of the interactions between many different species.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.